The subcommittee will come to order. Thanks for being here, everybody, today. And before we start off, I want to just call out a few people. Raina, this is her last hearing. Lieutenant Commander Raina McGrail. She's been our Coast Guard fellow. She's been working with John Rayfield quite a bit. Just want to give her a happy send-off and tell you thank you very much for your service to the committee and the country. Next, Captain Tom Allen. There he is. He's sitting back there. This is his last hearing, too. And they're all very happy about this, actually. That this is it for them. They don't have to do this anymore. But Captain Allen's going on to do bigger and better things, right? And we will miss you sorely here. And lastly, Joanne Burdian, Commander Burdian's leaving to go be a dependent or whatever you're doing in Washington State. And we just want to thank you for what you've done, especially Joanne Burdian. We've spent countless hours with Joe Casper and Joanne talking Coast Guard stuff. We have learned so much from you, and hopefully you were able to take a lot from us too. We think that this has been one of the most legislatively ambitious chairmanships of this subcommittee. At least that's what we've been trying to do, really pushing acquisition reform, really pushing icebreakers, and trying everything we can do to make the Coast Guard love itself. We want to weaponize cutters. We want to give you your own UAS. You're going to be on par with the Navy now when it comes to block buys and lead time materials. So, and icebreakers, E-LORAN system, all of these things that we thought were needed. I think, and Joanne definitely is responsible for helping put the Coast Guard on the right track. I know there's lots of coasties. It takes a lot of people to make the office liaison, the liaison office stuff work. But I'll just tell you, Joanne, you're going to be sorely missed too. Well, we don't know what we're going to do. And we actually introduced a bill yesterday that said we're going to withhold $1.3 billion until Joanne Burdian is reinstated as the House liaison. So we'll see how far that goes. But you're all going to be missed. Thank you very much for what you've done for the country and for the Congress and for working with us and making us better at what we do. So with that, the subcommittee is meeting today to review the status of Coast Guard infrastructure and how ongoing infrastructure improvements will move the Coast Guard into the 21st century. The service has been undergoing a recapitalization of its assets for over 2 decades to replace assets that are over 30 years old. It's been a long road with some hard lessons learned along the way, but progress is being made to ensure the Coast Guard has the assets it needs to conduct its missions. We now need to assure that the service has the resources to operate the recapitalized assets. The subcommittee has held oversight hearings over many Congresses to review the Coast Guard's progress from fledgling acquisitions capabilities to its now fully developed acquisitions programs. In addition, our oversight has included hearings on Government Accountability Office reports reviewing Coast Guard acquisition programs and how the new assets will support service missions along with where gaps may exist. An important part of this subcommittee's oversight is to understand mission capabilities within the asset recapitalization, how to identify mission gaps with new and aging assets, how maintenance of aging vessels can impact budget decisions, where new technologies could be used to provide improved mission domain awareness and assist the Coast Guard with better utilizing its assets and its personnel, and how other Coast Guard infrastructure may have been affected by the cutter recapitalization. The cost to recapitalize Coast Guard assets is in the billions of dollars, and the Coast Guard has worked to do so within smaller budgets and appropriations since 2010. The service has done its best to keep asset acquisition moving forward, but has been forced to make choices on what programs its limited funding will support. To focus on the much-needed new assets, the Coast Guard has continued funding for these acquisition programs, while shoreside infrastructure, shore maintenance, and the environmental cleanup and restoration programs have incurred backlogs. The Commandant of the Coast Guard and his State of the Coast Guard address acknowledged the shore infrastructure backlog, stating that the current backlog exceeds $1.6 billion. We understand the shore maintenance backlog is roughly $708 million. The bottom line is Congress needs to understand the needs of the Coast Guard clearly and succinctly. I have requested the Coast Guard send a wish list of projects to Congress, a wish list and unfunded requirement list. The list will not be available until the end of June, according to the Coast Guard. However, I look forward to discussing with our witnesses today the status of existing and new assets, any known gaps and measures being taken to address them, areas that can be streamlined, and impacts of operations and maintenance costs. I would like you to talk about what your June request will look like. Even though it's not the end of June, it's the beginning of June, but I think you guys know what it looks like, and we'd just like to hear if you're going to have icebreakers in there, we authorized 6 new cutters to go help CENTCOM. Those got approved in our authorization request. We'd like to talk about how you plan on actually building those, what your plans are going forward, and if those are going to be on your unfunded list too to the appropriators. So with that, I now yield to Ranking Member Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You started off with an appropriate thank you to those many men and women that have assisted us from the Coast Guard, Joanne and all the team, and I could repeat all of that. Shall I?
Sure.
Sure, we'll go ahead and do it. We'll let it go, Joanne. Thank you so very much to be able to work with you and your team. So let's get on with it here. I'm looking forward to renewing our oversight and the progress that's been made to date in building a ready, capable, and adaptable Coast Guard for this century. Your enduring role in protecting our shores and facilitating our maritime commerce, both nearshore, offshore, and around the world. A few things are more important to our nation's future prosperity. In fact, I was talking to my wife last night, and she said, "You got the Coast Guard here?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Why don't you tell them that the real wall is the Coast Guard?" So I'm going to tell you, the real wall, Mr. President, is the Coast Guard. So let's pay attention to that. Considerable progress has been made. Coast Guard's nearing completion of building out the program of record for the National Security Cutter, the most cutting-edge vessel ever to sail with the Coast Guard's distinctive red racing stripe. Additionally, the Coast Guard has successfully awarded the contract and moved forward to begin the second phase of the Fast Response Cutter program. Ultimately, this program will provide the Coast Guard with 58 cutters of remarkable versatility and capability to meet the challenging demands found in the U.S. coastal waters and allow the Coast Guard to retire its legacy fleet of medium-endurance cutters and the 110-foot island-class patrol boats. Perhaps even more important, the Coast Guard last year awarded the contract to Eastern Shipbuilding to complete the detailed design and initial construction of the most expensive segment of the recapitalization, a fleet of 25 offshore patrol cutters. This progress is real, and I appreciate the work that's been done by the Coast Guard in moving it along. The Coast Guard's acquisition directive deserves credit for keeping these programs on budget and on schedule. Several challenges remain, however, always the case, and that's the critical 3-letter B-U-T word. But the Coast Guard can ill afford to rest on its laurels. First, the Coast Guard's icebreaking fleet remains a liability, potentially a very serious gap in the Coast Guard's operational capability in high-latitude regions. Prodded by the Chairman and some of us, the Coast Guard has taken steps to expedite the design for a new heavy icebreaker, and yes, Admiral Ray, I will be asking you about this. We're going to want to hear more details, and when can we expect to have the award, and how are we doing with the Navy on this? So yes, there will be questions. I'm also concerned that the Coast Guard's capital planning has failed to adequately account for the need to recapitalize the service's inland river buoy tender fleet, which operates in my Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta. So we want to hear about that. What are we going to do about it, and when and how? Additionally, regarding aircraft, I remain concerned about the 14 C-27J surveillance aircraft. The Air Force, well, we won't tell you what the Air Force has done. They seem to have unloaded something they didn't want on the Coast Guard. I think we all had a piece of that puzzle, but let's hear about how that's coming along. And I remain supportive of the Coast Guard's continuing efforts to upgrade its fleet of 100 H-65 Dolphin helicopters. The unfortunate reality is the manufacturer of this aircraft isn't making them anymore. So what are we going to do about this? This is a long-term program, but we better be thinking about it today. Just a few of the issues. We'll get into it in detail, so thank you. Oh, the Chairman did mention shoreside. We ought to hear about that, too. Thank you very much. Let's get on with it.
One thing I'd like to talk about, too, if you could, a note for when you give your testimony here coming up, is the Navy's budget this year produces no new ships over last year's budget. They're doing a strategic pause where they're going to shore up a lot of their vessels that aren't able to fulfill. They're at like 30% capability. They want to move those to 80 or 90% capability. So they didn't write in with the president's budget. They didn't request any new ships over last year's budget. That's all going to come on in 2019, right? Is the Coast Guard doing the same thing? It doesn't look like it. It looks like you're going to keep on building and adding new things, like the 6 additional cutters that we authorized for CENTCOM. But I'm just curious on your take on that, and if you've been asked to look at doing the same thing that the Navy's doing, or if they're in a totally different place because of the overuse of their assets and just having to be out all the time and not having time to fix up their stuff. And the shoreside stuff is important simply because it's something you have to do. It's not integral to your mission, but it's important to your mission, and we want to know how you are going to balance your operational side with simply having to put money into repairs and things that have been taking a back seat to your operational capability. So today we will hear testimony from Vice Admiral Charles Ray, Deputy Commandant for Operations with the United States Coast Guard, Vice Admiral Sandra Stosz, Deputy Commandant for Mission Support with the United States Coast Guard, Ms. Marie Mack, Director of Acquisition and Sourcing Management with the GAO, and Mr. John Acton, Chairman of the Coast Guard Affairs Committee with the Navy League of the United States. Admiral Ray, I'd recognize you right now for your statement.
Good morning, Chairman Hunter, Ranking Member Garamond, distinguished members of the subcommittee. It's my pleasure today to discuss Coast Guard operational capabilities, and I'm pleased to testify alongside Vice Admiral Stosz. This is kind of unprecedented. The mission support that she represents is, as you know, vital to the field. Certainly appreciate the opinions of GAO and their recommendations, and we take those on board. And then Admiral Atkin and the Navy League, since Teddy Roosevelt, they've been supporting the sea services, and we appreciate that. Mr. Chairman and all the members of the subcommittee, I appreciate your recognition of our Coast Guard fellows here that have served you for the last few years. We need them back out in the fleet to get them reblued in the Coast Guard, and so we'll take care of them, but thank you for taking care of them while they were here. On a daily basis, the men and women of the Coast Guard use the resources provided by the Congress to save lives, protect our borders, prevent terrorism, interdict drugs, and facilitate commerce. And as our Secretary has said numerous occasions, the Coast Guard plays a vital role in border security starting 1,500 miles south of the Rio Grande. In the offshore transit zone, as we work to address the significant threats from transnational criminal networks. We address these threats by a force package that consists of really advanced intelligence, maritime patrol aircraft, advanced cutters, airborne use of force-capable helicopters, over-the-horizon boats, and highly trained and armed boarding teams. And in 2016, I think most of you are aware, but it's worth restating, the Coast Guard interdicted more cocaine at sea in 2016 than all the other law enforcement agencies in our nation, federal, state, and local combined, by doing what we do at sea in bulk. National security cutters and fast response cutters have proven how effective a modernized, intelligence-driven Coast Guard can be, and we certainly are excited at the opportunity to welcome the offshore patrol cutter, thanks to this subcommittee, into the fleet starting in 2021. We appreciate your continued support. And in addition to what we're doing now, we've got a well-documented surveillance gap along all of our mission set, but and we're looking forward to embracing the advantages of land-based unmanned systems moving forward. In fact, next week I'm going down to Sierra Vista, Arizona with CBP to look at how they're operating and what they're doing with those systems right now. As this subcommittee well knows, our nation and our service must also pay attention to our borders to the north. You all are well aware from the open source reporting of the Russian and Chinese activity in the Arctic, and I'd be glad to provide you a classified briefing at a different time that goes into great detail what they're doing up there or what we assess they're doing. And so to begin to address these challenges, our nation needs a fleet of at least 3 heavy and 3 medium icebreakers, and we really appreciate the leadership of this subcommittee in getting that moving forward. Closer to home, the Coast Guard plays a vital role in maintaining our nation's maritime transportation system. 26,000 miles of waterways, of rivers, ports, that contributes to $4.5 trillion economic impact. Over 250,000 U.S. jobs are all hinging on this maritime transportation system. We've got 35 inland river tenders that the ranking member referred to for everywhere from Omaha, Nebraska to Morgan City, Louisiana. and those ships average 52 years old, and it's time to start replacing them. And so we appreciate the down payment we got in fiscal year 17 of $1 million to start that process. We also need more marine inspectors. And it's not just inspectors, it's people that do pollution response, it's people that do accident investigations. This river system is vital to our economy, and we need more marine safety folks to address the challenges and keep up with the pace of our, because the Coast Guard intends to facilitate commerce and not be a roadblock. And finally, we thank you for your support for our cyber forces. For what you gave us in fiscal year 17, we'll put 70 cyber protection team folks on the front lines, and they are working this right now. Problem sets, both classified that we could talk about another set, and the things that you all see in the open news. Working both .mil and .gov, so we work within the Department of Defense network and within our DHS, and we close to that. And then finally, in closing, I want to thank you for your support by telling you a little bit about the fruits of your labor. A week and a half ago, I was in New York City with Secretary Kelly when we went aboard the Coast Guard cutter Hamilton. That crew had been gone for 7 of the last 10 months, first 2 patrols of what will be a 40-year career for that cutter, no doubt. And so these men and women, I gathered with them on the flight deck, most of them, about 140 of them, most of them younger than either of my sons, and they were so fired up. During the course of this 7 months, they sailed from New York to the South America. They were the first U.S. asset, the first asset of any kind in Haiti when the earthquake came through last fall. They interdicted migrants in the Straits of Florida. They went through the Panama Canal, rescued a merchant mariner 600 miles west of Costa Rica, saved his life. They interdicted in 11 different instances. They interdicted 19 tons of cocaine and arrested 77 people in the transit zone. All that on their first trip out of the barrel. And so rest assured, we're going to talk about things we need to do better in the service today, and we look forward to having that conversation. But the resources you provided our Coast Guard are being put in good hands, and our men and women are doing great things with them. So I thank you for the opportunity to testify and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral Stosz.
Good morning, Chairman Hunter, Ranking Member Garamendi, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. And on behalf of the Commandant and our devoted men and women, thank you very much for your oversight and for your continued strong support of the Coast Guard and our people. I'm honored to share this table this morning with the GAO and with the Navy League, and I value our effective working relationship with the GAO and the strong support of the Navy League, and appreciate the opportunity to jointly testify with Ms. Mack and Rear Admiral Acton. There's a strong linkage between Coast Guard operations and Coast Guard mission support, and I'm thankful to testify alongside my colleague, Admiral Ray. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about the Coast Guard's activities and support our mission execution, both in the near term and into the future. As Deputy Commandant for Mission Support, I'm proud to lead a talented team responsible for the policies and programs that equip, train, and staff our Coast Guard. My organization is responsible for human resources and personnel readiness, acquisitions and contracting, engineering and logistics, shore infrastructure, security, and the information systems and networks that enable Coast Guard operations in support of the Commandant's strategic intent and priorities. And consistent with those priorities, the Coast Guard is undergoing a critical transformation through the necessary recapitalization and modernization of our fleet of cutters, patrol boats, aircraft, information, and shore infrastructure. We're committed to excellence in our acquisition programs, and I'm pleased to report that our last 5 fast response cutters to be delivered were delivered free of production with 0 production deficiencies. And last year, when we awarded the offshore patrol contract, that largest contract in history, that was awarded without protest. So mission support is a business, and as such, we're committed to the affordability and continuous improvement. We utilize a mission support business model that employs the 4 cornerstones of total asset visibility, configuration management, product line management, and bi-level maintenance to drive down costs and increase operational availability. And in fact, as I speak this morning, there's 50-year-old Coast Guard cutters that have deployed from their home ports on the east coast of our country down through the Caribbean, through the Panama Canal, and are serving in the Eastern Pacific Ocean, conducting missions like Admiral Ray just described, and they're 50 years old, and that's the power of the mission support business model. And to that end, sir, I'll be happy to take questions on the Coast Guard maintenance philosophy and how that allows us to continue to drive these ships down to the 50-year age mark and keep them running while we're acquiring new ships. One of my top priorities is moving our new ships and aircraft successfully from acquisition to sustainment. By investing in planned depot-level maintenance, we have more than doubled the service life of most of our cutters and aircraft, fully optimizing our scarce resources. And beyond ships and aircraft, we must invest in our shore infrastructure and our IT networks. That's something we haven't talked as much about, to enable operations and support functions, to ensure security of our facilities, and to provide safe work environments for our people. And speaking of our people, they are absolutely the most valuable asset of all. We don't speak about them enough, but thanks for calling out the 3 people who are working for you who will be moving on. We must invest in talent management, the recruiting, the training, and retaining of a diverse professional workforce with the knowledge, skills, and abilities to give our service the competitive advantage that we need to perform our many missions and keep our nation safe and secure. In closing, I'm pleased that this subcommittee understands that the 21st century infrastructure and transportation network for America includes a vibrant and efficient maritime transportation system, and that a well-equipped and resourced Coast Guard is essential to ensure our prosperity and national security. And thank you very much for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral. Ms. Mack.
Good morning, Chairman Hunter, Ranking Member Garamendi, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss GAO's body of work on the Coast Guard's recapitalization efforts. Since the Coast Guard took over the role as lead systems integrator in 2007 to recapitalize its surface, air, and information technology assets, we have recognized that it has made great strides in its investments. For example, it has established individual acquisition program baselines for each of its new assets. However, as the Coast Guard moves forward in managing this multi-billion-dollar acquisition portfolio to modernize its aging assets, the Coast Guard is facing several key challenges. The 2 areas that I would like to highlight today are, first, the impact of increased depot maintenance and equipment issues for some of the new assets on operational availability, and second, the overall affordability of its acquisition portfolio. It is widely recognized that the National Security Cutter, the NSCs, and the Fast Response Cutters, the FRCs, are more capable than the assets that they are replacing, and they are contributing toward mission success. For example, the FRC and the NSC have greater fuel capacity and better handling, which improve endurance and effectiveness and have led to an increase in drug interdictions. However, we found in March of this year that these assets have not been meeting their minimum availability rates, resulting in lost operational days. This is due to an increase in depot maintenance needed to correct equipment and design problems. The engines for both of these cutters have been problematic despite ongoing efforts by the Coast Guard. For example, the NSC's engines overheat in waters above 74 degrees, which makes up a significant portion of the NSC's operating area, given that they are intended to be deployed worldwide. The FRC has also experienced engine problems requiring 20 engines to be replaced throughout the fleet. Fortunately, the cost of these replacements was covered by the FRC's contract warranty. Until these issues are resolved, operations will likely continue to be negatively impacted. Second, we have consistently reported concerns about the affordability of the Coast Guard's acquisition portfolio. While the Coast Guard is in the process of developing a long-term acquisition strategy, it continues to use its annual budget request as its primary strategic planning tool to manage its major acquisitions. Since 2014, we have found that there are funding gaps between what the Coast Guard estimates it needs and what it traditionally requests and received. The affordability of the Coast Guard's portfolio will only worsen once it starts funding the offshore patrol cutter. The OPC will absorb anywhere from half to about 2/3 of the Coast Guard's acquisition funding annually, beginning in 2018 through 2032, while it is being built. One of the most critical challenges the Coast Guard faces is the gap between the expected service life of its medium endurance cutter fleet and the OPCs, the first of which is expected to be delivered in 2021. To address this gap, the Coast Guard must use limited acquisition dollars to extend the service life of the 270 medium endurance cutter fleet. At the same time, it is building and procuring the OPCs. During the same period, the Coast Guard must also recapitalize other assets, such as the Polar Icebreaker and its fleet of river buoy tenders, as these assets continue to age beyond their expected service lives and in some cases have been removed from service without a replacement. For instance, the Coast Guard is currently operating one heavy polar icebreaker since the Polar Sea has been removed from service. Plans are underway to develop a new fleet of heavy icebreakers, but there is no formal cost estimate for that acquisition program at this time. The Coast Guard faces some difficult and complex decisions with potentially significant cost and mission implications. As we've previously recommended, the Coast Guard needs a plan to identify affordable priorities with realistic trade-offs and communicate where gaps exist so that funding decisions align with the priorities to enable long-term mission success. Efforts are underway to address this issue through the development of a 20-year capital investment plan, intended to identify all acquisitions necessary for maintaining at least its current level of service and the fiscal resources necessary to build these assets. But to date, efforts by DHS and the Coast Guard have not led to the difficult trade-off decisions needed to begin addressing the long-term affordability of its portfolio. Chairman Hunter, Ranking Member Garamendi, members of the subcommittee, this completes my prepared statement. I would be pleased to respond to any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mackin. Perfect timing. Mr. Acton, recognized.
Chairman Hunter, Ranking Member Garamendi, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I request that my full written testimony be entered into the record. This committee has long been one of the greatest champions of the Coast Guard, and the Navy League is very appreciative of your leadership. The Navy League is the foremost citizens organization to support all the sea services, including the Coast Guard. It is a privilege to be here today to talk about the Coast Guard's capabilities and how they contribute to the administration's pledge to invest in American infrastructure. We are a maritime nation that benefits from global trade, and investments in the associated infrastructure have been crucial to our prosperity. The Coast Guard safeguards this free and safe movement of goods, so key to our national welfare. With only 40,000 active duty service members and a budget that averages around $10 billion, the Coast Guard does far more to safeguard our national security than its size would suggest. The Coast Guard's unique role in safeguarding our national infrastructure includes a wide spectrum of responsibilities, including port security, safety of navigation, and coastal homeland security. Yet from the Navy League's perspective, the Coast Guard itself is a key part of our integrated infrastructure, part of what makes our national prosperity possible, and one crucial to our homeland security and our way of life. The Coast Guard protects our maritime sovereignty and borders from illegal activity. It fights terrorism off our coast. It inspects ports, both here and abroad. It ensures mariners on our waterways are safe and that the waterways are navigable. It ensures the integrity of our exclusive economic zone and protects the cyber vulnerabilities in our maritime transportation system. The Coast Guard is always there and providing an environment for which America can thrive. Yet to truly invest in American infrastructure, we must invest in the Coast Guard and its people. Two of the administration's biggest pledges directly affect the Coast Guard: strengthening our military and investing in our infrastructure. Investment in Coast Guard assets, including the recapitalization of its fleet, has already led to some notable successes, like the National Security Cutter and the Fast Response Cutter. Yet the Coast Guard needs greater investment to build a 21st century infrastructure for America. The Navy League recommends, first, procuring of 6 Fast Response Cutters per year. Second, a steady acquisition, construction, and improvement, or AC&I budget of $2 billion per year. Third, to fulfill its challenging mission in the Arctic frontier, the Coast Guard needs 3 heavy and 3 medium icebreakers. And finally, and perhaps most critically, an additional $750 million in FY 2018 funding to meet the 2020 icebreaker production goal. The Coast Guard faces a $1.6 billion shore infrastructure backlog that is being paid off too slowly, increasing operational costs and risks. The Coast Guard does much with little, but a real investment in this part of American infrastructure would be beneficial to all. The proposed presidential budget breaks its promise to this military service at a time when the Coast Guard is under strain, overextended, and underfunded. This budget proposal would hamper a service already operating on a shoestring. The Coast Guard suffers from the same readiness crises facing our other military services, including recruiting challenges, needed maintenance funding, and dollars for such basic needs as fuel. Unfortunately, the operational funds needed to keep pace with recapitalization have remained flat. Without investing in operational funds for things like fuel, spares, training, and manning, these recapitalization investments will be underutilized. To fully fund costs under a flatlined operation budget, the Coast Guard has had to make reductions elsewhere, ones that affect its people. The Coast Guard will always put its mission operations before all else without complaint. It's just part of their organizational DNA. But we're seeing the impacts of reduced operational funding. Navy League councils in the field have relayed stories of unit galleys closing and the opening of needed child development centers postponed. We know about reductions in training centers and tuition assistance, the cancellation of Educational Services Officer program, reduction in medical benefits, and fewer TRICARE medical advisors and health promotion coordinators. Individually, these may not cause anyone to rethink their service, but they add up. At a time when the service needs to grow by 5,000 people and the Coast Guard needs to invest in its people through programs like these, it instead is forced to make difficult trade-offs to ensure mission execution. The Navy League would like to thank this committee for its bipartisan leadership and thank Congress for ensuring that this underfunded and vitally important military service has the needed resources. These are critical strategic investments not just in the Coast Guard, but in our national security and safety, in our environment and economy, and in our maritime infrastructure. These are investments in our national sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Acton. Because we actually have some people here today, which is kind of fun, I'm going to recognize Mr. Mast first.
Appreciate it, Chairman. Hey, I got a couple quick questions for you. I'm going to start with you, Admiral Stosz. I appreciate the testimony from all of you. One kind of general and then one a little bit more pinpointed to South Florida. I know you all are mission first. I love it, Semper Paratus. I love everything about it. I've got to connect with my coasties down in Fort Pierce. They took me out on the water, and you know, anybody that spends time on the water, we know how maintenance intensive it is, anything that operates on salt water on a daily basis. So what I want to get to is the force that you have that's conducting day-to-day maintenance out there. How much of the actual force of the Coast Guard is dedicated to maintenance, to keeping everything running, and are they having the resources that they need? I'm talking about in the minutia of it to keep the engines going, to keep to keep the things moving, to keep it afloat. Can you give me a little bit more specific picture of what that looks like?
Yes, sir. So we have part of the mission support business model is our operational and our depot level maintenance. So what you're seeing out there at the station is your operational level maintenance, where those are funded locally. Those are operational personnel that belong to the area commander, the district commanders. And I do the depot level maintenance. My people up at, when those boats come in for overhauls, even the small boats come in for what we call sometimes cutter boat pooling. We'll bring those together, bring them back into a depot where we can strip them down and give them back to the operators. And we're deferring maintenance on both sides of the operational and the depot level. But what we try to do is make sure we're funding the depot level so that we're not repairing problems that happen on the spot. We don't want that cutter, that boat to be out there and stop in the water with an engine problem. So we're making sure that we get the depot maintenance to keep those engines going. And then the people at the operational end, they normally have much of the resources they need. It's more at the depot level that we need to make sure we have the resources, and we're looking at the backlogs.
What does that deferment look like in terms of your operational capability and drug interdiction, in terms of life-saving capability? What does that literally look like when you talk about that deferment?
So the deferment at the depot level, what that does is it just slide those availabilities, sometimes the service life extensions that you see on these are more for the cutters. They'll have to be slid to the right, and we should do those earlier in order to save ourselves on the maintenance, because it just costs more money to maintain if you don't do the depot level, and you've got to put them into the operational, put more money into them operationally instead of doing the depot work that will get them ready for back to sea again.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for helping me understand that a little bit. I know it's important because they're never going to make the mission lighter for you. It's always going to continue, but you have to have the appropriate resources to go out there and do it. I want to just focus a little bit also on Port Everglades and out there. I just want to make sure because it's down there in my area, and I wanted to ask you all, are you having the appropriate amount of communication with all of the infrastructure that's going on surrounding the expansion of Port Everglades? I know we have to move around one of your stations down there. Is there anything that we need to know about impact on operations, anything that you want to address on that front now that you have us here?
Sir, I'll just say from my side, the civil engineers who work for me are working closely with the Army Corps of Engineers, and we don't have any concerns. We're monitoring that with them, and I would defer to my colleague on anything operational, but we're set with the actual move.
Sir, you're aware, since you've been there, of how operationally important that's a 7th District unit, and that's the busiest district. You know, last year, I think 5,000 lives saved in that district alone and hundreds of law enforcement cases. So we're tracking. We understand the importance of the moves, and we've got plans in place to maintain operational capability. So thanks for keeping up with it.
Outstanding. I appreciate your testimony again, and I yield back the balance of my time, Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Garamendi is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to take up an issue that is extremely important to the minority, both in the overall T&I committee as well as in other committees. And if you'll indulge me to do this, and this is for Admiral Ray and the background. One of the essential functions of this committee is to exercise oversight of the executive branch agencies over which we have legislative jurisdiction. Thorough oversight is required for Congress and this committee to develop effective legislation that benefits the American taxpayers and meets our security requirements. It has come to our attention that the Trump administration, in an opinion from the Office of Legal Counsel, has determined that only the chairman of the committee or subcommittee of jurisdiction may exercise the oversight functions of that committee. Further, the opinion instructs that an agency should not consider an oversight request from any other member of Congress, including the ranking member of the committee or subcommittee with jurisdiction, as an inquiry requiring a response. It states that the agency may exercise its own discretion in determining whether to respond to these inquiries from the minority. Therefore, Admiral Ray, is it the policy of the Coast Guard to respond substantively to oversight inquiries made by the ranking member of this committee or subcommittee?
Sir, I'm not familiar with the policy that you refer to, but I'm familiar with our practice in the service of responding to subcommittees and committees, and we pride ourselves on being responsive. And we have a team of folks here that you recognize, 3 of them today. They make sure we get the questions, and then they make sure that we get the answers back, and we have processes for that. I'm not aware of any way that we separate the questions depending on the origin. If they come from the Congress, we make every attempt to answer it.
I need not expand further how important I believe this issue is. And apparently, the Office of Legal Counsel leaves it to the discretion of the agency. And I am pleased to hear that, as of now, your exercise of that discretion would allow the minority questions to be answered. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Then let me move on. Ms. Mack, I thank you for your testimony. In its fullness, you seem to be stating that the current budget and appropriations for the Coast Guard significantly understates the requirements that the Coast Guard has to meet its obligations. Is that correct?
Absolutely, sir. The budget does not reflect realities. For example, if you look at the President's 2018 budget request, the OPCs cost almost $500 million, almost half of the acquisition budget. The FRCs, almost a quarter of the acquisition budget. So that leaves you a quarter left that does not address the 10th NSC, the FRC plus-ups, the icebreakers, the service life extension for the medium endurance cutters, or the shore infrastructure, which we've already said is $1.6 billion in terms of backlog.
Have you developed the amount of money that would be necessary to meet those requirements?
No, that's where we believe that the Coast Guard needs to develop their 20-year plan with the strategies, with the assets that they need to meet their missions and the cost that is required before trade-offs can begin to be discussed.
Thank you for that setup. Now, Admiral Ray.
Sir, as our Commandant has stated recently before this subcommittee, we have established the program of record for the assets that we need, whether it's national security cutters, offshore patrol cutters, icebreakers, and various other assets. And to kind of summarize it, he stated repeatedly, and we believe it puts us in good shape, we need to get the growth of our operations and maintenance budget, our daily O&M budget that we do to do operations, to be at least 5% per year. That's something we haven't obtained. We've had a net 10% reduction in purchase power or buying power of our O&M budget since 2010. We need a $2 billion predictable recurring AC&I budget to do acquisition.
The setup question by Ms. Mack wasn't completely answered, so let me put it to you directly. I think it's the responsibility of this committee, and I'm almost certain that the chairman would agree, that we need to have a long-term vision. And we need to prepare the Coast Guard for its current and future tasks. In order for that to be done, the Congress must exercise its authority and responsibilities to set the pace and to provide the money. We've not done so. In order for us to do so, we need to have from the Coast Guard your full requirements for funding to meet the program that is of record. Therefore, and I'll work this out with the chairman so that we could both ask the question for you to develop for us the money necessary year by year going forward to fully address the requirements of the Coast Guard. And we're talking acquisition budget here. So that 20 years looking out there, which Ms. Mack just discussed. Also, Mr. Acton, in your testimony, you made a very forceful statement about the needs. It seems to me that it is time for us to fully fund the requirements of the Coast Guard in every way, and all of the acquisition programs, the program of record in its fullness, so that we know what it is the requirements are. We may or may not be able to meet that, but our task is one of making choices. I said earlier, in my view, the Coast Guard is the wall. I believe we have some $2 billion that's going to be added to the ongoing physical wall on the terrestrial side. So we need to make a choice. Could we move $2 billion from the terrestrial wall to the water? What would that do for the Coast Guard? So anyway, help us with this, and I'd like to work with the chairman to put forth a request for the full funding over the next 20 years, year by year, to meet the full requirements as Ms. Mack has stated it. So with that, I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the extra time.
Thank the ranking member, and once again, we're just happy to have people here. So I'm going to recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Ray, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about acquisition strategy, and I think that under Congressman Mass' questions earlier, you guys covered this a bit, but there's this perception out there in Congress and in the public that spending federal money is effectively a waste of money and causes deficits and things along those lines. Could you talk a little bit about your experiences through the investment of the FRC and the NSC, and how that program is actually performing in terms of the financial return on investment compared to your legacy equipment?
Yes, sir. I can, and I've had quite a bit of interaction in that security cutter fleet from my time in Pacific area where I served before this, and the effectiveness of those assets on patrol, whether in the Bering Sea, whether the approaches between South America and Central America, their ability to stay on station, seakeeping, the capability they have for intelligence, which we should really have a separate classified briefing on that. It's foundationally different than how we've done business in the past. There are cutters that are getting underway right now, and specifically national security cutters. While we are certainly proud of our 50-year-old 210-foot cutters that are doing great service, the return on investment for a national security cutter patrol, the amount of seizures they get, the amount of intelligence they process, and their contribution to attacking these transnational criminal organizations is without question. There's no question of the effectiveness. With regards to the fast response cutters, we are pushing them further downrange. We are pushing fast response cutters with a crew of 25 people all the way down to the shores of South America along the Leeward Islands. And the effectiveness, and these are crews that that's a long ways for a patrol boat to go. And the effectiveness they have, whether they're communications. We just had a seizure off the coast of Martinique, and the patrol boat skipper wrote back specifically talking about the C4 IT system that is on board that fast response cutter and how he couldn't have found the bad guy, couldn't have caught him, and couldn't have processed it without the systems that are on there. I could go on and on, sir, but that's the answer.
So you're seeing better performance, you're seeing better return in terms of your ability to perform your mission, and what about O&M cost? Are you seeing O&M cost comparison that you could comment on?
Yes, sir. The O&M costs are higher than they were with our previous assets, and that's one of the reasons our commandant's gone on record, said we need at least 5% growth in that just planning factor for O&M costs per annum.
Actually, let me follow up on something you said. You made mention of your Pacific Forces of Southwest Asia, the work you're doing with DOD over there. Have you received any indication, any signal from DOD about your continued presence, the need for the Coast Guard's continued presence in that area?
You referring to South China Sea, sir, East China Sea, that area? We have been in conversations with the Department of Defense. Unfortunately, several of those are classified in terms of our contribution. We have a long-standing, recurring relationship with the Department of Defense, so we're interoperable, primarily national security cutters once again. So yes, sir, we've been in communications on that. We don't have any units deployed there as of right now.
Do you think that under the contract you have right now for FRC, that you have sufficient flexibility to provide adequate hulls for presence that you're providing right now in the Pacific Theater?
We've got a capacity challenge right now, sir, so we can't get those assets out there fast enough. And thanks to this subcommittee, we're turning the corner on the FRCs with this year's budget. So it's capability is not in question. It's a capacity challenge.
Okay. Switching gears a little bit, AIDS navigation. While I think there's a lot more attention to OPC, FRC, NSC, which I understand, a little bit sexier vessels, some of your inland waterways and some of your buoy tenders. If we're talking about 21st century infrastructure, can you talk a little bit about your existing assets that in many cases are 50, 70 years old that are carrying out those inland waterway missions, and how you think those assets are able to perform in a 21st century environment as we work to help to improve the infrastructure in our inland waterway system, and talk a little bit about your strategy for replacing those?
Yes, sir. With the assistance of this subcommittee, for the first time ever in fiscal year 17, we've got $1 million to do the analysis on the kind of start the program moving it forward, because they need to be replaced. There's some changes in technology that will probably work on the margins for this 35 ship fleet that are literally all over the heartland, from Omaha, as I said, Oak Island, North Carolina, down to Morgan City, and everywhere in between. And so we'll work on the margins, some modern technology, but at the end of the day, the river changes, as you know. And when the river changes and go ups and down, there's really not much substitute for a boat on station planting those buoys. So when you've got a barge coming down that's 4 wide and 7 long, moving grain and petroleum products out of the heartland, and that's our competitive advantage as a nation, is that river system. And you got to have buoys on the water to do that, and there's no way to do it except the way we've been doing it. And so those vessels need to be replaced.
Well, just as I think important to the subcommittee, if the Coast Guard could help convey a comprehensive strategy, acquisition strategy for us, I think it would be very helpful in us being able to help you in terms of upgrading some of those assets that I think are needed if we're truly looking at 21st century capabilities. And let me just clarify, certainly South and East China Sea, important, but I think you have an ongoing mission. I'm going to have this roll off the tongue. Pat Fortswa, did I do that all right? All right, where you have a presence in Bahrain and other areas, and I think that also applies to having a presence of NSC and FRC in those areas. So just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Larson is recognized.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Admirals, each of you can choose to answer this, about shoreside infrastructure, where this year's budget reflects about a 93% cut in shoreside infrastructure, facilities, aids, navigation, and housing. So if we enact the budget as is, it'll be impossible for the Coast Guard to address the current $460 million backlog in shoreside infrastructure that you've prioritized. So I'm just wondering how shoreside infrastructure fits into your priorities if we're sending folks off on state-of-the-art platforms and coming home to infrastructure that's literally falling apart in some places. How can you always be ready if that's the case? Can you try to address that for me?
Yes, sir, I'm happy to do that. So investing in shore infrastructure is one of my top priorities. Rebuilding, the Coast Guard's crumbling buildings, training centers, our classrooms and our barracks, our housing, our shoreside facilities like our piers and our boat lift facilities and our covered moorings. Those aren't just good for the Coast Guard, that's good for America because that creates construction jobs and communities across the nation. So I'm passionate about reinvesting in our infrastructure. As you know, we've had to make the tough trade-off decisions over the years of decremental budget environments, and often shore was where we made that trade-off as we wanted to keep hot production lines running with the capital assets we've been talking about thus far. Now, you've heard the Commandant say we need to rebuild and repair and modernize the Coast Guard, invest in our modernization, invest in our infrastructure. We do have a $1.6 billion backlog in our shore construction account and a $700 million backlog in our maintenance account. And what we need to do to get at that is we need to have a $2 billion CIP, capital investment plan.
Right.
We need to have the 5% O&M funding per year that's going to get at that $700 million backlog and continue the maintenance we need to do, the preventative maintenance that has to keep these assets available because they're what support our operations and our people. Not just the operations, but the people who run them.
So it sounds like you've not only run the numbers that we see today, but you've run the numbers out, 5 to 10 years to play catch-up as well. So if that is the case, then, well, how are these tough trade-offs being made, knowing full well that that the end result is that we have shoreside facilities that are really not in a position to support all these great new platforms, and they are great and they'll be new, these great new platforms that they're supposed to support. What discussion's taking place inside the Coast Guard, inside DHS, and inside OMB on this?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. And I want to thank the Congress for supporting our major acquisition shore infrastructure funding that gets tied to our new ships and aircraft, and that has been funded. So you'll see when we have a home port where we're clustering our cutters, we are getting the money, and that's usually tens of millions of dollars per port to build out that infrastructure. So we're doing that. And we're rebuilding from hurricanes. Thank you for the $15 million down payment on our $90 million damage assessment for Hurricane Matthew.
Yeah.
But it's the other routine, recurring, our training centers, the other facilities that fall into the backlog, that there isn't any room left at the table once you've funded all that, and then you've looked at those, like I said, the production lines always trumps the infrastructure that we say we can get at that tomorrow. And we're waiting for that day, and that's why we need the $2 billion SIP.
Yeah. Again, I don't know which one of you could answer this, but on the on the OPC timelines, and this is sort of the opposite of the discussion we just had, sort of this discussion about where you put your money. Even with service life extension providing up to 15 additional years to the existing medium endurance cutter fleet, you're looking at anywhere from a 2 to 5 year gap for your OPC replacement for your nearly 1-to-1 replacement. So does that mean are we anticipating seeing service life extensions going 17 years to 20 years, or are we going to accept a gap on those replacement timelines?
Congressman, what we're going to do on there is, you'll see that chart the GAO submitted. It's a great
Yeah.
chart. There's only about a 2 to 5 year gap, as you said.
Right,
And
depending on the
Yes, sir.
OPC. Yeah, right, yeah.
when they come off their service life. And, well, we do love those 50-year-old cutters, so that if we stretch those to 50 years, we'll be able to close that gap, sir. So we do plan on making sure those cutters, those 270-foot cutters, last until the offshore patrol cutters come online.
I'm sorry, are you saying that your plan then is not to allow those gaps?
No, sir, we're not going to allow those gaps.
Is that right? Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. I'd now like to recognize Mr. Lewis from Minnesota, the Vice Chairman of the subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank everyone for coming today and your presence here. I want to talk a little bit about the administration's proposal and prioritization and everything we're supposed to do here. Ms. Mack, you had mentioned that the administration's proposal for the offshore patrol cutter as well as the fast response cutters amount to about 75% of the budget. There are right now 2 icebreakers that get a lot of attention, the Arctic icebreakers. But there's quite a bit of commerce in the Great Lakes region, my part of the country, and we need to make certain that those shipping lanes remain open during the very, very harsh winters there in the Great Lakes. 3rd largest economy in the world with a GDP over $5.7 trillion. Much of this is our economy. Much of it travels in the Great Lakes. 160 million tons of waterborne cargo transport on the Great Lakes. I know that at one point, I believe it was in the Appropriations Act of last year, we had, or maybe it was 2 years ago, 2016, we had about $2 million for the survey and design work associated with ice-breaking capacity in the Great Lakes. Now, we've got one heavy and one medium Arctic-wise. Where are we for the Coast Guard's plan on funding those icebreakers in the Great Lakes right now? Ms. Mack, we'll start with you.
Thank you, sir. Right now, I believe we have a team that's actually doing work for this subcommittee on the icebreakers and is about to report out in the next week or two. But the concerns we have with the icebreakers generally, if there's pressure, if funding is made available earlier, there may be pressure to increase the making decisions earlier, and that would mean sometimes making decisions without all complete knowledge. And we've done plenty of work in GAO to show when decisions are made, procurement decisions are made without all the available knowledge, there's definitely increase in costs, changes during the contract, performance and schedule delays at that point. So broadly, I would also say that there's some concerns with the icebreaker in terms of who is going to be managing that acquisition process. Is it DHS or is it the Navy? Who has oversight of that program? Who has oversight of the contracting? And who has final say of the requirements, depending on who has oversight of the contracting? Those are some of our broad concerns when it comes to icebreakers.
Is it a matter of additional resources or organizational control that you allude? I mean, what is our fleet capability right now for icebreaking missions in the Great Lakes?
I would defer that question to the Coast Guard for what their actual capability are.
Go ahead. Vice Admiral Ray.
Sir, as you know, we've got the Coast Guard Cutter Mackinac home port in the Great Lakes, and we've got a fleet of 140-foot icebreakers, which are going through a service life extension right now. We performed an analysis that was delivered to the Congress in 2016 about the requirements for additional icebreaking capability, and we haven't moved forward since then in terms of additional capability, because our assessment is that the priority is for this other Arctic and Antarctic icebreaking capability when you compare things in the balance. So our plan right now is to address the Great Lakes icebreaking requirements with the Mackinac and the 140s. And Admiral Stosz could talk about the service life.
Design and surveying.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I mean, we had some, obviously, 2014 and 2015 were tough ice years on the lakes. To mitigate that in the current state of affairs, we've got memorandums of agreement with the Canadians to share assets, and that's how we will get after it in the near term. Okay.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Garamendi, I yield to him. And
Mr. Chairman, you and I have had a little discussion here. I'd like you to pick up the next point, and then I'll take my turn after you.
okay, so thank you very much. And thanks to all the members who came to the subcommittee hearing again. I guess the first question I have is where's the 20-year SIP? Where's the 5-year capital investment plan?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. So the 5-year capital investment plan is under development, and the 20-year plan needs to.
When is the 5-year capital investment plan due?
That's, sir, we submit that.
When you make your budget request, right?
Yes, sir.
You've already made your budget request, though, right?
And because of the budget year, sir, is a bit different this year with the change of administration, we're submitting the SIP, we're developing and submitting that up through the review process, sir. And that 5-year SIP, when we get that, we can then build on the 20-year SIP. We owe the 20-year SIP. We know we need to submit that 20-year SIP. So that's all in progress right now, sir.
Because we're looking at all this stuff, but this stuff doesn't make any sense if you don't have a 20-year plan. If you don't have a long-term plan, this is just pie in the sky, right?
Yes, sir, and we know the Auth Act in 2015 directed us to submit that 20-year SIP, and we're working on that, sir.
Could you tell me explicitly what's the holdup on the 5-year plan due to change in administration? How would that affect what the Coast Guard needs to operate, no matter who the president is?
It needs to go through review, so we need to go through the process and the steps and submission of that SIP.
Submission, it's going to be reviewed by OMBs?
I don't know the answer to that question, sir. I'd have to get back to you.
Or is that just the way it's always been done?
I don't know.
Okay. Second question is, we started a year or two ago in the Armed Services Committee a National Sea-Based Deterrence Fund because of the submarines we have to build and how expensive they are and how much of the Navy budget they're going to take up, right? It looks like you're going to have the same issues, where you don't have the money for, I mean, Mr. Graves talked about it, Ms. Mack talked about it, the 75% of your budget going towards 2 types of cutters, and that leaves almost nothing for icebreakers, for anything else, for land-based UAS. It's a really small amount. Have you put any thought towards doing something like that? Are you familiar with the account that I'm talking about?
I'm not familiar with that, sir.
It's basically a pot of money that they've created where they can put money into it every year to prepare for a big chunk of their budget being taken to make submarines. That's what they've done. Looking forward.
I've not looked into that, sir. I'd like to. We always like to benchmark for best practices with our sister services. I'd like to look into that, but do not know that program.
Okay. After speaking with Mr. Garamendi, what we might do on the House floor is create this fund for you. We probably wouldn't put any money into it. Depends what the appropriators say. But that's something I would look at if I were you as a way to hedge against unforeseen needs, things that you might need later, 5 or 10 years out, and also simply to add money to it going forward so that you have more money when you have to recapitalize and to build new stuff. Number 2, let's go up to this chart too. Mr. Rayfield was telling me that since 2010 you've had the money to go from the dark blue to the turquoise.
Yes, sir. We've had the money in our survey and design to look at the plans, the specifications, determining the work that needs to be done to extend the service life of those 270s. So there's a number of different pieces of maintenance and work items you have to come up with. So that's what we're in the process of doing right now.
But it's been 7 years.
Well, and we're also looking at trying to...
Since 2013.
We're trying to layer this in with the offshore patrol cutter acquisition, sir.
Yeah, but what I don't understand is if you wait long, if you keep waiting, you're not going to need to do any service life extensions because it's going to overlap the OPCs.
And, sir, we will adjust the work list that we need to do in that service life, so it might cost less for us to do that because we might do a smaller one to get it to get those assets to close that gap. We'll have to do the analysis to make sure we do the right work that's needed to be done to close the gap.
How much money do you have in that account?
I don't know how much we have now, sir. We've been given several $1 million to work on the design of the work specification.
So just really simply tell me, what takes 4 years? Have you not wanted to do it, or are there technical difficulties, or?
Sir, we're making those tough trade-off decisions. So we're trying to layer this in after the Offshore Patrol Cutter Award and make sure that we have doing the tough trade-off decisions on what you can fund.
Okay, I'm not understanding. This chart is fake. This is a fake chart because all you have is the dark blue. You were supposed to get out to the turquoise at least, start doing that, right? So the turquoise doesn't exist, correct? There is, the turquoise on this doesn't exist, and the little dash lines don't exist either. All you have is the dark blue is what you have right now. So right now, the very first ship, the Dependables, should have been decommissioned in 2011. It did not get a service life extension. It didn't get, it hasn't been upgraded anyway. So it's 2017, so you're 6 years past its decommissioning date, and you haven't done any upgrades to it. But you have the money, and you've had the money for 4 years. I'm just not understanding.
Sir, we haven't had the money to do the work. We've had the money to
Design.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm
To
still not
design.
understanding.
We're still.
But that means you haven't done the design work if you still have the money in the account.
Oh, sir, I'm not sure how much money we have in the account. I apologize. I don't know the answer to that question. I'll have to look and see how much of that we have. But I know that I just talked about this project with my program yesterday, and we're working on providing that specification so that we can determine what the right level of work is so that we can close that gap. We're committed to closing the gap. I'm sorry about the details. I'll offer you a brief to go over it in detail, sir.
But if you keep analyzing things, you're never going to do anything.
And I'm not sure it's analyzing as much as it is developing that list and looking at where we need to put the effort. I'll get you a brief,
Okay.
sir.
All right, Admiral, we'll take you on that. The 6 FRCs that we authorized, that were requested by CENTCOM to operate in Southwest Asia, Middle East, how do you plan on paying for those? And is that going to be in your unfunded requirements list? Because now we've authorized it, it wouldn't necessarily be an unfunded requirements list, but is that going to be included in your June submittal?
Mr. Chairman, we are going to look at that unfunded priorities list, and when you come to the assets, the 6% of our budget that is funded for defense with offshore contingency operations, for instance, that's one part of funding we might be able to use, and if that was the case, we might not need it on the unfunded priorities list for appropriated funds. So we haven't come to the determination yet on what the funding would be, and nor are we really the decision authority on that. So we're still looking at the options for recapping. My people did a maintenance assessment of those 110-foot patrol boats that are over there. I've got a little less than 5 years left on them. We have some time, and we're starting to work towards what that replacement capability looks like, sir.
Okay. I'm going to yield to Mr. Garamundi now. And I've got more questions when he comes back around. Oh, I'm sorry. What's it? Mr. Lowenthal is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It seems to me that rising sea levels will be a challenge for the Coast Guard. What kinds of assessments have you made regarding rising sea levels, and how vulnerable are your facilities, and what plans do you have in place to address these vulnerabilities?
Thank you for the question, sir. We have a shore infrastructure vulnerability assessment ongoing right now with my civil engineering staff. We're looking at natural disasters. We're looking at rising tide. I've got buildings that aren't able to withstand the seismic activity in some parts of the country. I've got shore facilities that aren't going to be in the longer haul able to withstand the rising tide. So that study is in progress, and my people will have some answers to us in the near future, and then we'll use those to inform our investment decisions.
I assume that when you talk about rising tide, you're talking about sea level rise.
Yes, sir. Or it could be for flood, hurricane.
Oh, I understand that,
Yes,
but
sir.
I'm just concerned about sea level rise
Yes,
right
sir,
now.
both. There's different parts of the coast that could rise faster than the other based on whether the plates are sinking and the sea level is coming up or just the sea level.
Thank you. And Vice Admiral Ray, my question is, I know you're aware of how important the Port of Long Beach is to our national economy. A cyber event in the port could have far-reaching impacts and cause considerable damage to the regional and also to the national economy. What is the Coast Guard doing to protect our ships, safeguard our ships and ports from cyber attack?
Thank you for the question, sir. We've been, I'm proud of the proactive approach our folks have taken to in this cyber arena. We've got authority to work this issue. And we've really been working, for the past 3 years, we worked awareness with industry. And that ranges depending on the sophistication of the business entity involved. And we've got these coordinating units at each of our major ports in Long Beach, no exception, where we've got area maritime security committees, and each one of those now has a cyber element to it. So primarily up until now, we've been working the awareness phase along with awareness of industry standards for security. And then the next phase is to include this when we do our visits to port facilities and to ships to work through, and this is not an onerous, over-the-top type viewpoint. It's working with the facilities to say this is what we think you should be concerned about given your laydown and kind of work with them on that. So I think we've been moving out smartly on this. The good thing too is industry has a lot of, at all facilities, they have a lot of motivation to get this right. And they're aware of the threat for obvious reasons.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I'm going to yield to Mr. Garamendi because we got out of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the series of questions and also the question about sea level rise, extremely important. We've got a major problem here. Ms. Mack, thank you so very much for really identifying and clearly positioning this issue before us. I understand the Coast Guard admirals. I know the problem that you have. I think you fully understand the situation, but you are being reined in by the OMB and not allowed at this point to fully express to us the full needs of the Coast Guard. I think that we do have the obligation to demand from you the unvarnished, scrubbed, and censored information necessary for us to adequately address the Coast Guard's acquisition needs as well as its operational needs. And so I'll work with the chairman to develop a series of questions for you to deliver to us the specific requirements that you have, unscrubbed by OMB, to fully address your acquisitions as well as your ongoing operations and maintenance requirements. At the present time, we do not have that information. It may be that Ms. Mack, you may have more information. You deferred when I asked you the question about what the requirements would be. You deferred to the Coast Guard, as I thought you might. But perhaps you have some sense of what those numbers are, at least in general terms. And I would appreciate it if you could deliver to us your assessment of what those requirements are so that both the operations, maintenance requirements of the Coast Guard and the acquisition requirements can be at least known to us. The Navy League, Mr. Acton, you spoke to this. If you have any sense of this, I would appreciate those numbers also from your sense of it. Also, the chairman a moment ago suggested that we were having a little offline discussion up here about putting into the Coast Guard authorization legislation, which will soon be on the floor, a floor amendment that would set up a separate account similar to what the Navy has, so that there would be the normal operational accounts and ongoing maintenance accounts and budgets for that, and then a special account in which the acquisition money could be separated off. Right now, these two are in competition, the result of which is something, it isn't going to work. Your ships are going to simply be laid up for lack of maintenance or even fuel, and we'll go build a bunch of new ships that won't be able to operate for lack of fuel and maintenance and so forth. So we got a problem here that we're going to have to find a way of addressing in the larger sense of it. And the chairman and I will work on that, as he said a moment ago. I do have a series of other questions. Some of them would seem to be minor in comparison to what I just talked about. Buoy tenders. What's the cost of a buoy tender? A new one? Any idea? Just a rough estimate?
Are you talking the river tenders, sir?
Yep.
Inland river tenders? It's about $25 million. Those are off the shelf, available from the Army Corps of Engineers.
25 million a pop? 100 million? Four or five a year? A couple $100 million a year, we get 8. Okay. This just takes us back to the question I just raised a moment ago, or the issue. The offshore patrol cutter, you've got a new program underway. Just a quick status report. I know it's real new. That's basically less than 4 months, I believe. Just a quick status report.
Yes, sir. The offshore patrol cutter is contract awarded. The shipbuilder is going through detailed design. We've established an on-site office, what we call a project resident office down there. We have the funds in 17 and 18 are going to purchase the construction for number 1 and the long lead time materials for number 2.
And the delivery?
Delivery is 2021 for the first ship.
Okay. I had the opportunity to visit the shipyard and meet your team that's down there. So we'll periodically ask for an update. I believe the contract is similar to the fast response cutter contract, in which there is a warranty. Is that correct?
Yes,
For
sir.
Excellent. I like the idea of warranties, because I also visited the Bollinger facility, and there was a repair team there from the engine manufacturer that was rebuilding the manifold, if I recall correctly. Is that so? Keep the warranties in place. A couple of other questions. This is to you, Admiral Stosz. It's come to my attention that the Coast Guard is facing a major gap in funding to cover the health care expenses for retired Coast Guard personnel. Is that correct?
I don't know. I'm not aware
Well,
of that.
it is correct. And this takes us to something that the chairman and I will have to work on the Defense Authorization Act, in which the Coast Guard personnel requirements, both active and retirement, should line up with the general military requirements. I think we're going to need to put a clause in the NDAA to address that. If you can come back with some specific information for us so that we can, I think the NDAA is taking up this month. So we want to watch that carefully.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Acton, ELARAN. We can go into it. Question, based upon your experience with the Department of Homeland Security and with the Coast Guard, do you think the ELARAN system could help eliminate the problems with the GPS?
Yes, sir. As you know, the GPS system has been around for a while. It's fairly easy to disrupt. There's a growing reliance on that system in virtually every technology area, and yet our adversaries are gaining a growing capacity to be able to disrupt that. So from our perspective, GPS is a single point of failure from much of our infrastructure. And this issue has been known for quite a number of years. Although the Coast Guard should not have the lead and does not have the lead on that, I believe it's the Secretary of Transportation overseeing the National Executive Committee on Space-Based PNT, the Executive Committee. The Coast Guard does have a key supporting role in that. So as a single point of failure that's been recognized for some time, the Navy League would support advancing a backup program like ELARAN.
Okay. In our Coast Guard reauthorization, we actually give to or instruct the Department of Homeland Security to take up this issue, excuse me, Department of Transportation to take up this issue and to work with the Coast Guard on implementing it. Do you think, well, let's just reload direct, guys. One more thing, and this brings us back to this overarching budget problem here. Ultimately, the Coast Guard did do this. They did do the Loran system, and the question is, are they capable of doing the E-Loran system? The answer is, of course, if they have the money. Correct, Admirals?
Yes, sir. Given the required resources, we've taken on a lot of missions over the years.
Give us the money and you can get it done, right? Okay, I've been beating this drum so many times, but yes, it's in the authorization, it's in the reauthorization. We're going to try to make sure the money is there also. You mentioned IT networks in the testimony. Could you expand on that?
Yes, sir. So our information technology network is the foundation on which our mission systems operate, our shore-based mission systems, our programs and software, and on which the cyber capability rides. So Admiral Ray can't implement his cyber security operations unless I've got the enterprise mission platform up to date. And right now we have aging IT infrastructure systems like our electronic health record system, as you probably are well aware, has had to go back to paper. We're in the process of that acquisition. That's become a major acquisition for us. And these IT acquisitions had not been major acquisitions in the past, or they're formal acquisitions, rather. Also, our core accounting system. We're working with a lot of these aging systems that run much of our Coast Guard, and also our mission systems, our applications that we rely upon to do our Coast Guard business. So there's a lot to that infrastructure for our IT, and we're starting to fund that, and we are on it. We have requirements we have to meet through DoD on the .mil side to do much of that work.
Both the chairman and I are on the Strategic Arms Subcommittee, which deals with a lot of this IT stuff. And for the Department of Defense, this is a huge issue. This is the first I've heard about this issue in this context with the Coast Guard. I would appreciate a more complete briefing about this overarching issue. It's not only your ability to communicate and to keep track of what's going on, but also the question of the security of the system.
Yes, sir. We are in the same exact place the DoD is with this. We are on the .mil side. We're aligned with them. We're going through all the same processes and procedures that you'll see on your other committee. Yes, sir. I'll get you a brief on that.
All right. I'm going to just quickly, if I might, Mr. Chairman, I'm way over time. I'm sorry here.
It's just
Are you-
us. No, go ahead, go ahead, it's just us.
Okay.
There's no complaints.
Icebreakers. We've had a couple of questions back and forth about the icebreaker. Again, just a very quick update. I missed part of the testimony. I think you may have answered it for the Great Lakes issue. But let's go back to the heavy icebreaker and bring us up to date on that.
Yes, sir. The heavy icebreaker, where we are with that is, first of all, I'm happy to hear the president at the Coast Guard Academy graduation a couple weeks ago call for building many heavy icebreakers. And I'm glad to hear the support that Secretary Kelly gave us yesterday during his testimony for supporting icebreakers. We have stood up an integrated program office with the Navy. This is the best thing ever. We are leveraging the expertise of both parties to reduce costs and increase the speed we can deliver this icebreaker. And that timeline is now 2023 for delivery. That integrated program office is doing some great things. One of them is that they were looking at the requirements and doing trade-off analysis to drive that cost down well under $1 billion. They are, we issued out 5 industry studies, as you might be aware. I'm very excited about those. They're charged with looking at reducing risk, we're looking at identifying technical elements, and they're looking at specifically block buy, what the possibility is for that. And we've also been doing tank test trials with Canadians partners. And that acquisition is, like I said, looking to deliver in 2023. The funding in 17 and 18 is going to get us the RFP, request for proposals. That'll be out in 2018, and then we'll be ready to issue detailed design and construction in 2018 or 2019.
So we're moving along on schedule. You quickly mentioned Canada. Could you expand on that?
Yes, sir. Canadians have a lot of experience with ice breaking too, and so we're partnering with them to do tank test trials of the hull form to look at validating viability of different hull forms. It's part of the.
Are they interested in a heavy icebreaker also?
Yes, sir. They have heavy icebreakers also. That's been a part of their history.
So is there a possibility that Canada and the United States will build a similar icebreaker, and instead of 3, there may be 4 or more, depending on what Canada wants?
Sir, I don't know where the Canadians are with their ice breaking right now. I've got people who do. We can get back to you on that, sir. But we are partnering with everybody we can on this to make sure we get it faster and better.
Okay. Also in the Authorization Act, which will soon be on the floor, there's the issue of a study of a rental or lease of an icebreaker.
I defer to my colleague on that one, sir, Admiral Ray.
We've been in contact with the folks that are interested in leasing an icebreaker, sir, and just, in fact, just last week, they've developed ice trial, a proposed way to do ice trials, because this one that's available for lease has never actually broken ice, as you know. So we've been in communication with them as recently as last week and told them we would be interested in sending Coast Guard observers for this ice trial, if and when they do that.
And if that works out, that would be for an interim period of time, and that would be the operations budget. And that takes us back to the issue of acquisition budget in competition with operations budgets. We go back and forth here. Please keep us up to date on it. I know it's a priority amongst some of the members of the committee, and so we want to stay on top of that trial, and if you'll let us know about that. Mr. Chairman, I could probably go on for an hour, but I've gone on 10 minutes past my time, so if I'll ask for forgiveness and yield back.
Thank the ranking member. Let's stay on the IVIC for a minute, right? That's the only U.S.-made icebreaker that exists besides the 2 that you have sometimes when they work. So you said last week they developed a sea trial plan? Or
No, so they developed this a few weeks ago, but they sent it to us to review several weeks ago, and our folks took time and due diligence in reviewing the ice trial plan for the IVIC, and we responded to them week before last and told them, that it looked like a reasonable plan, and this is not a quote, but, a reasonable plan, and that we would be interested in sending Coast Guard folks to observe it if and when they do execute those plans.
Okay. So when they execute the ice trials, according to what the Coast Guard wants them to do, you're going to have Coast Guard observers?
We offered that. We haven't closed we haven't gotten a response back from the offer that we gave them as of yesterday when I asked.
Okay. Thank you. Admiral Stosz, really quick, the VA just came out and said that they're going to use the DOD's electronic health records system, finally. I mean, this has been going on for a decade now where they each have their own thing and they don't talk to each other. Why didn't you guys piggyback on DOD?
I would love to, sir.
So now you're not going to, but you've developed your own system.
We aren't developing our own system. We're going out right now doing the market research because we're required to by the acquisition process.
Why would you go out and do market research on something that the Department of Defense already has? You are part of the Department of Defense.
We are. No, we're the military service, not part of the Department of Defense. We're trying to get in on the DOD's acquisition program. Now that the VA has come on board with that program, we see an opportunity to leverage into that. There were some challenges on the contracting side with leveraging into the DOD program, given where they were with the contract. With the VA just looking to get on, we're excited. Just yesterday, I was talking to my staff about get me a brief on this and how fast we can move on this, given that we're at paper records right now, and there's nothing good about that. I'm very excited about this right now. We need to look and see what the requirements are. As you probably well know, we have an audit undergoing right now because of the IHIS, the problems we have with the program in the past. We want to make sure we do everything right. So that's what we're doing, is making sure we do it right. But if we have a chance to get in here and get onto this program, this acquisition that DOD and VA are getting onto, we'd love to do that. We owe it to our people to be compatible, to have, from first handshake to retirement, to have a compatible healthcare system.
And the committee would highly recommend that you don't do your own thing, and that you piggyback on DOD's plan.
Yes, sir.
Right? You talked about cyber. I'm just curious really quick, and Mr. Garamendi asked for a hearing on that. If we could do a classified hearing, that'd be great, because I'd like to hear about the bad guys spoofing when we try to track them, and because that would nullify your game theory, which you use to not check 99% of the cargo containers coming into the U.S. The 1% that gets checked is basically done by you saying this is coming from a bad place or going through a bad place, and we're going to check this. That could probably be affected through cyber attacks or spoofing and that kind of thing. So if we could do a classified hearing on what Mr. Garamendi talked about, that'd be great. Is a heavy icebreaker going to be on your unfunded requirements list?
Mr. Chairman, we would prefer that icebreaker was appropriated funds, either this ship conversion Navy that was used last time for the Coast Guard Cutter Healy, or in our appropriated funds. But if not, then that will be something that's at the top of the list that we submit.
It wouldn't hurt to pile on, right, to ask for it more than once. And there's something here I don't understand. You said you're requesting $10 million in this year's budget request, and tell me if I'm wrong. $10 million for shoreside infrastructure. Is that correct?
I believe that 10 million is the number, sir. I need to pull out my.
So what number?
I believe that's the number.
Okay, so let's just say it's 10, and maybe 8 or maybe 15. Let's even say it was 20 or something. I don't understand. There's a $1.6 billion construction backlog, right?
Yes, sir.
And a $700 million maintenance backlog,
Yes,
right?
sir.
And the Coast Guard's requesting $10 million. 1.8 billion plus 700 million, or 1.6 plus 700, that's more than 10 million.
Yes, sir.
I don't understand.
It goes to the tough trade-off decisions that we have to make.
No, but well, I guess my question is, though, again, this is about the Coast Guard not requesting what you need. So why wouldn't you request what you need?
It won't fit within the budget that we have to build.
We go around this all the time, back and forth, back and forth. You're there to request the budget for what you need to accomplish your missions, right?
Yes, sir.
And you have mission needs statements, which lay out your statutory missions. There's 11, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you have that, but then you don't request the funding that would allow you to meet those mission sets. I just don't understand. I mean, $10 million is paltry. That's nothing. So why even have this? Why even say you have the? I mean, so you say you have this massive backlog, all these things you have to do. I guess Admiral Ray, operations-wise, is not getting that infrastructure fixed up going to have an effect on the new assets that you're purchasing?
Yes, sir, it does ultimately. I mean, as the ranking member said, we got to have a place for folks to come back home to. And so what our commandant has stated moving forward is we got to reconcile this, just as we did with this. We made a statement about the 2.0 billion AC&I recurring. We would like to, our target on that is 300 million recurring for shoreside infrastructure. We're not there yet. We've had to make tough decisions like other folks, and as an operational agency, we've tended to favor operational assets, and that's where we've been up until recent years. And so moving forward, we're going to have to adjust. But to answer your question, these resources, the shoreside infrastructure is important to operations as well.
Okay, and what there is right now, and Ms. Mack, I'm going to kind of ask you to fill in the blanks here. You have a total disconnect between the budget you're receiving, or the budget request the Coast Guard has given Congress, and the President's budget request is totally out of connection with what the President has said. Totally. In fact, you guys remember back about a month or two ago, OMB was planning on cutting your operational budget by like $1.3 billion. out of your $10 billion budget, right? That's a total disconnect from what the president says. So either the president's office has no input whatsoever with your budget request, or the requirements that the president has for you and the U.S. Coast Guard, or they just don't care of what the president says in OMB. What do you, Ms. Mack, what do you think the issue is here? Because there's a total disconnect. In fact, we found out about the OMB budget cuts the day after the president gave his State of the Union, where he talked about transnational terrorism and crime and drugs, which is what the Coast Guard does, and then they're going to propose to cut you by 10%. I don't get it. So what's the disconnect?
I agree with you, sir. You're absolutely right. There's been a disconnect. We've been reporting that for years, as you are well aware of. For the deferred acquisitions, Coast Guard's answer, because of the budget is limited, has been they've been deferring their acquisitions. As a result, that's created this bow wave, and it's become to the point where now it's unsustainable. And I think the first step, a positive step, is this 20-year plan that we've been talking about, to be able to lay out all their assets, all their missions, and then all the funding that's required, because then they can begin trade-off discussions. What may impact what missions they may not be able to do as effectively. But that can't be done until that's all laid out in a plan to see, okay, we have this much, and this is how much we need. What assets are we not going to get? What assets are we going to get, and how they impact mission? So that's what we believe is a first step.
Well, why do you think the disconnect exists between what the president has said he wants to do and wants to use the Coast Guard for, and the lack of funding?
That could just be priorities further up in DHS or OMB. I can't make that call, where that priorities decision is being made.
Okay. Do any of you know how much money out of OCO was earmarked for Homeland Security out of the National Defense Authorization Act? Because I believe Secretary Kelly got some money, or at least requested some money in what is going to be OCO coming up, but you guys don't recall how much that is? And obviously then you wouldn't know if any of that is earmarked towards the Coast Guard.
You mentioned CENTCOM.
Yeah.
I don't recall the amount, but we received in 17 the OCO funding we need.
What was the OCO funding spent on?
That's spent on our fast response, our 110-foot patrol boats over in the CENTCOM AOR.
Okay, and that's what the 6 FRCs we requested are supposed to take the place of, or to help bolster that?
Mr. Chairman, when those 6 110-foot patrol boats over there are no longer capable of serving, in my assessments that they have about 5 years left, the operational analysis is being done to look at what the replacement capability is. It might not necessarily be one for one. We have to look at that.
Well,
But
I mean, CENTCOM asked us to request 6 FRCs for you.
I'm just saying, sir, that's the number we have now. We just do a whole analysis to make sure we're doing things cheaper and the right way, so making sure we get the right cost and drive down the cost of the acquisition. But certainly the OCO money is a viable place to look to fund new assets to go over there. We just haven't looked into that, and that's not our call.
Do you have a plan on, if those 6 FRCs, so let's say that the 6 are cut down to 3 or something in the Senate, or with the appropriations, you have a plan on how to put those into the build cycle for FRCs? Do you add one a year for 3 years or something, or what do you do?
Are you talking, sir, about if we do use the fast response cutters to replace those 110s over in the CENTCOM AOR?
Yes, so we authorized 6 FRCs in our authorization bill we just passed. 6 more because of a request by CENTCOM to us, which I'm sure that was in consultation with the Coast Guard at some level. What have you done to work that into your plans, assuming that a few of those get approved and there's funding for them?
I will defer to my colleague on that. We haven't gotten that final auth bill yet, and I haven't worked that issue yet.
Sir, we're working with the Navy staff and with folks over at the Department of Defense to kind of fine-tune. We got clear demand signal from CENTCOM, clear demand signal from the NAVCENT over there that the patrol boats that are currently there, they need that capability moving forward, regardless of, now then the question that we haven't answered yet is how to be funded. whether it's OCO, whether it's appropriated, we haven't answered that question yet. We're working on requirements right now, which are fairly straightforward. We're working directly with the Navy staff. And the one thing that we've made, where we've discussed this, is we do not, if it is an FRC that replaces them, we do not want that to take the place of the fielding plan we have right now for our FRCs, the schedule that we're on. So the 58 that we're planning to deploy around the country, if this would be over and above, in other words, we wouldn't take those and divert them. That's the planning document, or the planning strategy we have right now for that.
All right, thank you. Mr. Garamendi is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, you're on to a series of questions here that are, I think, really, really important. There are two pieces of this. A request for 6 FRCs. Are these the new FRCs? Are these part of the 58 that we're supposed to have, or are these additional to that? Are we going to send the FRCs that are presently available over there rather than somewhere around continental United States? What's going on here?
Sir, our intent is to take the 58 that are currently scheduled to program a record and keep them going where they're supposed to go in the United States, or in our territories, and, you know, Puerto Rico, et cetera.
So if the Defense Department wants 6, these are in addition to the 58, and so these would be available at some day in the future?
That's correct, sir.
Okay, well, we're going to need some detail here. Somebody's going to have to find the money for those 6, right?
Absolutely, sir.
What do they cost apiece? What's the cost of a couple $100 million?
I don't have that right at my,
Well, okay, there's a certain number here. If there's 6, so you're saying those 6 do not come out of the 58 that are, so these are additional. And if CENTCOM wants them, who's going to pay for them? DOD budget or Homeland Security budget? Meaning your budget. Okay, we need some detail here, folks.
yes, sir.
Soon.
I do have fiscal
Okay.
17 enacted for 6 of those. It's $325 million.
Okay. Now, thank you. We presently have how many Coast Guard ships in the Persian Gulf?
610-foot patrol boats, sir.
6.
Yes, sir.
Who's paying for the, is that the cost of those operations out of the OCO fund?
Yes, sir, that's correct. That's completely OCO fund.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Obviously, we need some more information here about that, because we're looking at some additional ships being built, or else we're going to go short on the operational plans to protect our coasts. Airplanes, quickly on airplanes. Your C-27Js, the current budget that's been proposed by the President basically guts the upgrading of these so that you could use them. Is that correct?
This, Congressman, the C-27s, they do come with us needing to be missionized.
Right.
And needing to have all the sparing. So that's what the money's for right now is we've regenerated those. We've regenerated 6 of those out to Airspace Sacramento. We're regenerating the rest of them, and the money is for missionization and the sparing.
But your budget proposal doesn't provide the money to do that. Is that correct?
I know we have money in the budget for the sparing and the missionization. It might not be as much as you're thinking.
Well, this goes to the overarching question that the chairman was raising a few moments ago, and that is that the budget of the Coast Guard has been seriously censored by OMB, and the money necessary for acquisition of new ships is now in competition with operations and for upgrade, including the CJ-27 or the C-27Js. It's essential that we have good data and good information, because it is our responsibility to make choices about where to spend the taxpayers' money. And the current information that we have available from the Coast Guard is inadequate. It does not provide us with the necessary data that we need to make a choice about spending money for acquisitions, for operations, for maintenance, and amongst the various other requirements of the government, specifically the Department of Defense, which is plussed up by some, I think, $30 billion. And it appears to me that some of that plus-up comes directly out of the Coast Guard procurement and operations, in which case we got a problem, that we need data and information. I'd like to work with the chairman to put a specific question, a series of questions to the Coast Guard about the money that you need for operations maintenance, and also money you need for the ongoing procurement programs, which stress across, which include both ships, planes, unmanned aerial vehicles, and the rest, so that we can have the data necessary to make some tough decisions. That means I need information that is not scrubbed, censored, and otherwise altered by OMB. The chairman was trying to get at this, and I'm going to support him in every way to get the data and information that we need directly from the Coast Guard. So I suspect we'll pursue that. Mr. Chairman, I thank you. I'm going to yield back.
Thank the ranking member. I think, one of the big things is, too, we're on the Armed Services Committee, so we see the service chiefs come in all the time and say, here's what we need, here's what we want. DOD is not asking for this. They go out there and fight for what they need, right? You don't do that. In fact, you're highly censored by your overseers at OMB, so you're not even able to come in and say, here's all the things that the Coast Guard really needs. OMB can go to hell. The president says, here's the mission that he wants us to accomplish, and here's what we need to accomplish the mission. That's what all the other service chiefs do. They do roundtables with us. They do classified roundtables where they go, here is no joke what we need to survive and do what we need to do. You don't do that. And we're trying to get you to do that. Right? We've given you the acquisition capabilities that the other military services have, finally. I don't know how you went for decades without having the same acquisition authority for lead time materials and block buys and all this stuff. I mean, no wonder everything was so jacked up for so long. So we're trying to get you there, but we need you to fight for yourselves. So, Mr. Acton, let me close with this last question. If the Coast Guard, and Ms. Mack, you might be able to pile on here, if the Coast Guard the Coast Guard is an armed service, we're trying to make you more armed. We want to really weaponize all your stuff more than it is. But if the Coast Guard's an armed service and it's within the department, but it's not within the Department of Defense, if it was in the Department of Defense, right, at least for those missions that were not regulatory in nature, do you think we'd be having the same conversation about them not having the money that they would need to accomplish their missions?
Sir, I think living in a different culture that DOD is, I'm sure the Coast Guard would react differently to some of the issues that they're facing. But the larger issue is that the Coast Guard assets are multi-mission. They're both law enforcement and DOD, and it's unique in that regard. And that really is what enhances the Coast Guard's value to the country, is being able to be both Title X military and Title 14 law enforcement. So really, it's a capability multiplier for the nation. And so the different areas that we've been talking about today regarding investments in Coast Guard assets and people and training, those are really strategic investments in national issues and national platforms. It's more than just aircraft, ships, and people. This is important to the nation.
Okay, but let me ask you, just because you're in DOD doesn't mean you can't do law enforcement. Like right now, they're in Homeland Security and they can do DOD missions. Where you put them doesn't matter in terms of what they can do and their capabilities. It has to do with what their funding is and where it comes from.
Yes, sir, that's correct. Unlike the Reserve and National Guard, the Coast Guard does not switch hats from Title 32 to Title 10. The Coast Guard is at all times simultaneously a Title 10 military organization and a Title 14 law enforcement. So they keep those two hats on all the time and don't have to switch. And that gives the Coast Guard some real operational advantages that the country should be leveraging.
So my question is on funding. If the Coast Guard were in DOD and not in Homeland Security, do you think that their funding levels would be different?
Yes, sir, I think they'd be higher.
Ms. Mack?
GAO does not have a position on where the Coast Guard should fit, whether it should be under DOD or DHS, but I will address your bigger concern of costs. We currently have ongoing work looking at the recapitalization based for your subcommittee. We also have ongoing work that's looking at O&M costs, as well as shore infrastructure, which just kicked off. So hopefully in the next year, we should be able to provide you some realistic costs that the Coast Guard is needing to do some of these things to meet their missions.
Can we get back at this in a couple of months?
Yeah, we can. And we'll, Mr. Garamendi just asked if we can take this up in a few months again. What we'd really like to see is your 20-year plan. Because even when you get all, so say that everything works beautifully and more money gets dumped in and all these new assets, they're all done and they're on time and they're on budget. You don't know what your operations and maintenance is going to be. You said it's more expensive, and I can see that. It's like taking in a new 2017 truck compared to a 1969 truck that you can just open up the hood and change out the carburetor or something, but now you got to plug it in. It's much more complex. You don't know what those are going to be. And if you have a flat budget and you're not preparing for that higher O&M, then you're going to be in the same situation you are now in 15 years, which I don't think you want to be at. So you need to get the 20-year plan to us so we can look at that and you can look at it. Because obviously if you don't have it, not even you can see it if it doesn't exist. So you can see what your O&M costs are going to be. I think that's kind of what we need to see the plans. And the 5-year plan you will have to us.
Unscrubbed.
You'll have to us when?
Mr. Chairman, the 5-year plan is under development and is going through the process.
I got you. So you're going to have your unfunded requirement list at the end of the month. Why wouldn't you have your 5-year plan along with that? Because then how do you know what you need? If you don't have a 5-year plan, how can you give us an unfunded
Sir,
list?
the 5-year plan is the first, then the 20-year plan and the unfunded priorities list build on that. So
Right,
those are
that's
all-
what I'm saying. You're going to have, the Commandant said he's going to have the unfunded requirement list to us at the end of this month, right?
Yes, sir.
So if the unfunded requirement list builds off the 5 and the 20-year plans, but you don't have the 5 and 20-year plans, and how would you have an unfunded requirement list based on them that don't exist?
They're building in sequence, sir, and then we'll have them
Okay, but you don't understand what I'm
submitted.
saying.
Yes, sir.
The unfunded requirement list you're going to have to us at the end of this month.
Yes, sir.
But you said it's sequential, and that list will build off the 5-year plan and the 20-year plan. So if you're going to have the third thing to me in 20 days, then why wouldn't you have the 5 and 20-year plans, which it builds off at the same time or beforehand?
To my knowledge, sir, that's how they come. They will all come by the 30th of June.
Okay, so we'll have them all this month. The 5-year plan, the 20-year plan, and the unfunded requirement list in the next 23 days.
And, sir, I can't control the timing of the process, but that's certainly the goal.
Okay,
If I might.
sure. I yield, Ranking Member.
Chairman, you're on to an extremely important issue here, and it's one that I've taken up a couple of times. There is the plan developed by the Coast Guard, internal to the Coast Guard. It appears as though that plan cannot be delivered to us until OMB approves it. In other words, censors it, reduces it, and brings it into compliance with their notion of the overall federal budget, which puts the Coast Guard in a very difficult situation and puts us as though we are mushrooms kept in the dark. We really need to know what the Coast Guard needs, unscrubbed, uncensored, and direct from the Coast Guard without OMB. I think we understand OMB very clearly. Mr. Mulvaney at OMB has his own vision of government. I do not believe, certainly not my vision, nor do I believe it is a vision of government that meets the needs of the Coast Guard in protecting all of the Title 10 and Title 14 responsibilities that the Coast Guard has. So what I would like to work with the chairman on is to get directly from the Coast Guard uncensored information about what the operational and maintenance requirements are for the Coast Guard over the next 5 years and beyond, as well as the acquisition requirements of the Coast Guard to meet their program of record funding requirements. Without that information, we cannot do our job. That is the job of making choices. Choices about what the Coast Guard needs versus all the other requirements of government. And so that's what I think we need. I'll work with the chairman to try to get that directly from the Coast Guard, uncensored, unscrubbed, see if we can do it. And Mr. Acton, you're quite correct. The Coast Guard has been very, very good soldiers. They salute and carry out the responsibilities that have been given to them as modified and directed by the President and the Office of Management and Budget. However, we have our responsibilities too, and they're somewhat different. Yield back.
Thank the ranking member. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a hearing in July on the 5-year plan and the 20-year plan and on your unfunded requirements list, because the easy way to take care of this is when you submit your request to OMB and they scrub it, you take all the things that they took out and you put all of those prioritized in an unfunded requirement list. Then, in essence, you have done what the ranking member just said. That means we get to see the unvarnished, everything that you've asked for presented to Congress. That's what I would like you to do. So you have the budget that you've, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, my experience at the Department of Interior is that there's a step in here, and that is the Office of Management and Budget sends to the agencies the parameters in which they must then develop their budget, which is, again, a control mechanism by the Office of Management and Budget. But that doesn't necessarily provide us with the information we need about the acquisition and the maintenance and operations. So I want to be careful here about what we're actually getting.
I guess I would say, and please try to get us as much as you can, whether it's been approved or not. Like I said, we'll have a hearing at the end of July on this stuff, and hopefully have the answers by then. And with that, the last thing I'd like to do right now, since there are no further questions, is recognize Raina. I'd like to take a few minutes to recognize Lieutenant Commander Raina Hernandez McGrail. You're Irish, Hispanic, everything. That's good. That's good. Raina's a native of Roswell, New Mexico. She's a Coast Guard Academy graduate with a master's degree in international and public policy from Johns Hopkins University. She's who John Rayfield described as a no-joke boat operator, which I think every coastie likes to hear, even though you've been stuck here. During her career on the Coast Guard, she has served on the Coast Guard cutters Decisive, and I think the Decisive on that chart was supposed to be decommissioned like 5-6 years ago, so good luck to you. The Decisive, Haddock, the Key Biscayne, and Mona Moy, which brought her to the Middle East during Operation Enduring Freedom. During her tenure in Washington, D.C., she served in Coast Guard headquarters and as the senior duty officer in the White House Situation Room during parts of the Bush and Obama administrations. She then found her service, taking her here to the Capitol. She has been with the subcommittee since 2014, and her knowledge of and experience with the Coast Guard have made her an indispensable asset to have on staff. Her interpersonal skills and professionalism every day show she is an exemplary Coast Guard officer, and she was a great representative of the service during her time with the subcommittee. Raina's time with the subcommittee is coming to an end today on June 7th. She will be heading down to Pascagoula, Mississippi to join her crew on the Coast Guard cutter Decisive. On behalf of the committee and the subcommittee, I'd like to thank her for her service, for her time with us, and wish her well in her future endeavors. Raina, thank you very much. Thank you. And with that, the hearing's adjourned.